And for that reason, the amendments that was proclaimed under the emergency has been amended. And for that reason, this session will essentially deal with elaborating much more and explaining to the nation what those amendments and repeal of some of those regulations entail. But before we do that, we would, as customary, start by giving an update on the health situation as it pertains to the COVID-19 pandemic. And to do this, we would ask the Honorable Minister of Health to give us an update. Comrade Minister.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, moderator. Thank you, colleagues. Good morning. I am happy today to make very, very short two announcements or update. Number one, we have now so far recovered 6 persons altogether who were diagnosed with COVID-19. In our language, what we always speak here, that will be case number 3, case number 5, case number 6, case number 14, case number 15, and case number 16. All of these 4 cases have now fully recovered from COVID-19. Some of them have already been announced before, but I'm just giving you now the totality of the picture. Number 2, we are going to carry out targeted testing. As I have informed you earlier, targeted testing, we are looking at different type of cohorts. This will include the health workers, people who are working in the fishing factories, in the fishing sector, in the mining sector. This will also include the journalists. So by next week, we will try to get everybody who is also at this center will also be tested. The test is very simple. It's non-invasive. It's just a swab which is taken from an individual. You will not feel anything, so don't fear anything. It's harmless, and in actual fact, it is also pleasant to undergo such a swabbing. We will again identify more and more a group of people who will be tested, and our target is to get more than 200,000 people tested in Namibia for COVID-19. This will also include the categories I have mentioned earlier in the past, like those who have been in contact, those who are presenting to the health facility with respiratory ailment, etc., etc. So this is now one of the undertakings which we are going to carry out as from next week. We are now doing the preparations. Dear moderator, I think after I have made this announcement, I will take leave because I just came from another engagement. But the team from the Ministry of Health and Social Services, they are here, they remain here, and they will be able to answer the question should there be any additional question arising. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade Minister. Maybe I must also just clarify that today we've got an extended session. It is going to be extended with an extra 30 minutes. So the first part, as we said, is dealing with the health situation. And then at the end of everything, we would be having a question and answer session. So, Comrade Minister, you are more than welcome to leave us because we know that you must attend to other things. Thank you very much for your input. And then we will now be having Ms. Linikela Kalimba and Ms. Emmy Els Ndaveteta, excuse me for that. And sorry if I'm not saying it correctly. They are going to give us an update on the surveillance, from the surveillance pillar, as well as from the call center. But we are first going to call on Ms. Emmy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Emmy Els Ndavetela, not Ndaveteta.
Okay, thank you very much.
It's my name.
Sorry for that.
I'm heading the surveillance pillar. Good morning. Maybe to start with defining what is surveillance, because we had been talking about surveillance, but probably some people don't know what is really encompassed when we are talking of surveillance. Surveillance is mainly information-based activity which involve the collection, the analysis, interpretation, and dissemination of the data for action. We underscore for action, because when you are doing surveillance, it's just not a mere activity of collecting data, but there must be a meaning or a purpose why you are collecting that data. You need to take action. That's very important. So the surveillance data is used to evaluate the effectiveness of control and preventive of health measures. Now, in terms of COVID-19, this is the guiding pillar, how we need to act, how do we need to prevent or to apply our control measures. That is directed by surveillance. And for it to be effective, it needs to be standardized across all levels. What we do at national level should be done the same at regional level, district level, and up down to the community level. In this COVID-19 response, we are applying the guideline of WHO following the pillars, and we have also sub-groups under surveillance, because it's a very big activity, so for us to be effective, we need to split it in smaller portions. So we have a contact tracing, which is mainly responsible for identifying contacts. When we have a confirmed case, then we identify all the possible contacts, or all the people who came into contact with this person who is confirmed, so that we monitor them. We monitor them for the 14 days, specifically in the case of COVID, because each disease is having its own dimensions. So because of the incubation period of COVID, which is 14 days, that's why we monitor contacts for 14 days. Then we have the hotline, is also part of surveillance because it serves as an event-based surveillance. It's very important to know that the purpose of the hotline is to give the opportunity to the public when you don't know information or you want to be aware of COVID-19, of course you call the call center. But if you are also worried, or maybe you are aware of one person who might be presenting with COVID-19 symptoms, that's what we call event-based surveillance, where we get information, then we investigate that information. We have the laboratory coordination. Of course, with any outbreak response, you cannot do much without laboratory. So laboratory coordination is the link between the laboratory services and the surveillance, because we need to follow up. When we investigate the case, we need to have the results timely. So that's why we need this link between the two areas. Then we have the rapid response teams, which we deploy or dispatch immediately to the field when there is any issue to be investigated. And these are also the people which are doing investigation, in this case, swabbing at home or at facilities. Just to mention the few, because we are having about 7 sub-pillars under surveillance. What we are doing is also, it's a surveillance responsibility also to inform or to update the nation what we call a situational report. We update the situational report on a daily basis. We get information from all other pillars, then we put it in the report, which is shared. This report, when it's scrutinized, validated, and verified within the response teams and by the executives in the ministry, then it's become it comes into public domain. So everyone has the right to access that situational report. So basically, that's what we do in surveillance. I welcome questions, if any, because I know I have limited time.
Right. No, thank you very much, ma'am. What we will do, as we said, at the end of all the inputs, there would be a time for question and answer. And in fact, that we will be opening the questions to the general public. So we won't be posing questions to you now, but you must be on standby for the questions to be posed later. We will now ask Ms. Linikela Kalimba from the call center to give us an update.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning, ma'am.
I'm from the COVID-19 Hotline Center, and it is really a hotline. This COVID-19 call center is the initiative of the Ministry of Health and Social Services. The ministry started this center during the outbreak of the hepatitis E, and it was declared as a public health emergency operation center, which is mandated to deal with diseases outbreaks in the country. The center has various teams, and the hotline center is just one of them. The call center was functioned on a smaller scale, and it's just a component of put in place to assist the fight against hepatitis E and other future disease outbreaks. When the first COVID-19 case was registered in the country, a decision was made for the center to be fully functional and to operate on a larger scale and to connect the community at large with the healthcare providers across the country. We now known as a hotline call center, and we started operating from the 14th of March 2020 on a full scale. It operates 24/7 and with a staff complement, with a staff of 35 people. Most of them local Namibian languages are represented per each shift, and the staff are divided in 3 shifts, which is either a 12-hour shift or a 6-hour shift or a night duty. As I said, we are operating 24 hours. We have various categories of healthcare workers represented, as we have lots of graduates, the nurses, doctors who are doing their internship, public health practitioners, epidemiologists, as well as health information system graduated on board. Some of them are volunteers, most of them are volunteers, and the main responsibilities of the call center is to answer calls as they are coming in. We respond to questions, receive complaints and concerns from the public and channel them further. We give advice on and refer them to the relevant people and officers, because we receive calls from all the regions in the country. At the same time, we are also conducting research and preserve data collected for the future use. This hotline is really a very important link between the community and the Ministry of Health and Social Services. And I'm very happy to report that now the whole country is really in a accepting situation, because the first week during the lockdown, the country was in a panic mode, and we were receiving between 15 up to 25,000 calls per day just inbound calls. And we try all our best to answer the calls, even though we are at the receiving end of the Namibian emotions, because people call with various issues. We have also received calls from our president. Time to time, he calls just to encourage us and praise our work that we do. And because he said he's very grateful for that. The call center is run by a committed team and not by individuals, although sometimes one becomes overwhelmed when calls are so many. Our team is really very committed, and together we are running it effectively. And that makes us feel very important and valued indeed. And because of the too many calls, sometimes we need these young graduates just to be debriefed by the social workers and psychologists, and because sometimes it can become hectic. Sometimes we also get the visits from other people who are like the First Lady, the Vice President, His Excellency Nangolo Mumba, our Deputy Prime Minister, Mrs. Netumbon Nanjindaitwa, our Minister, Dr. Shangula sometimes also come, the Governor, Ms. Laura MacLeod Kashirwa, and some business people. They all paid visit just to encourage us and to check on our resources, if we are really doing well. COVID-related issues, calls received and query registered range from COVID-related issues to non-COVID-related issues. COVID-related issues are like wanting to know the signs and symptoms of the disease, how to prevent the disease, where they can go for testing, or people having signs and symptoms of flu, health, and also we also receive calls from the health care workers who are at the situation, having a situation at hand, like both from private and public. We also giving health education on the spot and also make use of the opportunity to stress the importance of social distancing and hand hygiene, as well as other important measures and individual needs. Some callers calls to ask about circulating SMSs that they are receiving from WhatsApp or social medias. And you know, we really receive lots of those questions. So I'm discouraging everybody not to maybe to forward this false or fake news, because when you send it to other people, then we are there to clarify. And then, you know, some callers which are maybe having unrelated issues are like, they're asking about the grants, or they don't have water, labor-related issues, lockdown guidelines, nowadays the zones, the permits to function as essential services, traditional doctors who are informing us that they found a cure and they want to test it on the patients, school children and parents wanting to know when school is starting, tenants unable to pay their rents and due to the lockdown, domestic disputes. Some callers are just calling to chat because they are bored at home or they don't know what to do with themselves. Some people are calling because they send the wrong e-wallets to the wrong numbers. Some callers are just calling to put us on place and because they think we are doing nonsense. All calls are very important to us and we treat them as such. Sometimes when we can assist at that moment, we will call back and advise them accordingly. We receive all callers from outside Windhoek when they need medical attention or when they are reporting that they are having signs and symptoms of COVID-19. or they come in contact, or they have came into contact with a person with and symptoms of COVID-19, or they came into contact with a tested positive, and we refer them to the surveillance teams or wherever they are, because we have got surveillance in each region. Remember that the work of the call center is only to advise and connect the callers to the other surveillance teams or to the right officers. That is where our mandate ends. Because now we spend too much time answering the totally irrelevant issues sometimes. We only want to focus on health issues. And so I'm urging maybe the different sectors to come together and create both public and private, to establish their hotlines. Even if just maybe managed by 2 people or 3, and they don't need maybe to make shifts like us, just maybe like normal 8 to 5 hours. Because this one will really take off some burdens from our shoulders. Because, you know, when the calls is coming, we cannot ignore them. We have to assist where we can. But then, maybe behind that call, the call of the e-wallet, behind that call there's a really sick patient, or there's a doctor at a consulting room who really needs to speak to us. And then now it's covered, it's blocked because we are busy speaking to these people. And we only have got about 11 lines, and if each line, one line is talking about grants, one line is talking about e-wallets, one line is talking about water, one line is talking about boredom and all those things which I've said earlier, then we are really blocked. We cannot educate or speak about COVID-19. You know, these people, they can team up with alike sectors and then man their own hotlines. That is my humble request, if it is possible. I have seen that the Minister of Finance has set up their own hotline. Maybe the Minister of Education, Minister of Trade and Industry, like Minister of Agriculture, maybe they can team up together with Agribank. All the banks together, they can put up their center, including DBN. So, and then it will be much better for us. So, and then we will focus on what we are mandated to do. At the end, or in conclusion, I must emphasize that we value each caller. We assist to the best of our abilities. We are at the call center because of our people. I should, however, also humbly ask our parents to teach the kids the importance of the call center, because most of the time we have got small children. You can hear the mother talking behind, and they are just playing our phones. And you know, we cannot ignore them. We have to to listen first, because we don't know what situation is that child in. So we have to answer, and yeah. I must also use the opportunity to thank each and every agent at the call center for their hard work and determination. They really answer each call. There's no dull moment with us, and they really work hard, even though they are volunteers. And to our callers, keep calling us. If you just start with a headache or a cough, or you are in doubt about your health, please call us. And please stay at home and take care of yourselves. And we are here for you. And for the people who are bored, they can maybe start on, maybe do your gardening, mend your clothes, or do other things inside your yard, not in the street. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Linikela. What we will do now is we will allow 5 minutes to the media practitioners to ask questions specifically related to the health update before we would jump into the discussions of the amended regulations. So I would call upon media practitioners to please take the mic and to pose the questions just specifically related to the health update. You may go, sir.
Thank you. My name is Kevin. I am a presenter on Eagle FM. Thank you for the opportunity. If I am to indicate to you over that line that I do have all the classical symptoms of COVID-19, what's the procedure after that? Am I supposed to get in a taxi? How do you take it from there, from the call center?
Okay, thank you. Second one.
Good morning, thank you. My name is Ogito Craig. I'm a journalist. I work for Republican newspaper, part of NMH Group. I'd like to know, in terms of the situation report that was mentioned, which is in the public domain, how the public could access that situation report, and then any additional information about the how the testing will proceed will be most welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the colleagues, and not just Lini Keller and the first person that spoke, I was also informed that there are other people from the ministry that are also on standby to answer some of those specific questions. But please, can we get a response to the first question? What are the procedures if someone were to indicate that he or she is having the symptoms? What are the procedures to be followed? From the call center?
Good morning.
Morning, ma'am.
My name is Emma Helau. I'm the deputy head of the call center. If a call comes in and somebody is complaining of the signs of COVID-19, there are certain questions that we are asking. For example, now, because the borders are closed, we can no more ask about traveling history, but traveling history was key in the past. We are going to ask that person if they have come into contact with a person that is either tested positive or is portraying signs of COVID-19, and how many days is the person having the signs, and the key ones is the person, for example, having fever, is a person having a headache, and then we, depending on where the person is, we refer them to the relevant authorities. In Windhoek, we have Robert Mugabe who's doing the testing. But before we refer the person to Robert Mugabe, we'll ask the person if they are having a public transport, or they are using public transport, or they are having private transport. Because if this person is complaining about the signs and symptoms of COVID, we do not want them to use public transport. So if they do not have public transport, we send our response team to go and do the screening, or if they have private transport, we ask them to drive to Robert Mugabe. In the regions, we have surveillance team across all regions in the country. We connect with a person in the responsible, in the specific region, and then we give the number of that person that called for them to connect so that the person is followed up. Thank you. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you very much. The second question related to the situation report that was given.
I need this. Okay. On the question of accessibility of the situational report, we share this widely with stakeholders, and we also give a copy to our Public and Relations Office so that it further circulates to all other people who can access it. And it's also uploaded on the ministry website. Further to this, we are now busy with making it electronically. We are working on an electronic version dashboard of this heat rep with just a snapshot of the key indicators, which I believe will be launched early next week. Then the link will be provided also to the public so that everybody who have means to access that then will be able to have that updated information with the fingerprint. Okay.
Thank you very much. I must just add that if there are any other questions, those questions can be posed towards the end. We have now come to the end of part 1 of this session. But as I said, after the 2 speakers that would now be introduced and that would now be giving their input, towards the end of that, we would be having a general question and answer session, first to the public, and then thereafter again to the journalists. So I would ask journalists to please hold on to those questions. We've now come to the main reason why we are here. As we all know that as of midnight early this morning, our country is officially under a national lockdown. The regulations that were promulgated in the first ones, Regulations 9, had to be amended. And in order to unpack the new regulations, we've got here with us the Honorable Minister, Honorable Yvonne Dowsett, Minister of Justice, and she is assisted by the Attorney General, Mr. Festus Pandeka, and they are going to unpack for us the meaning and the necessity of these new regulations. I would start first generally, before we delve into the very specifics of the regulations, Yvonne. Would you mind if I say, Yvonne?
Not a problem at all. Good morning.
Good morning, anyway. The first question to the Minister. What necessitated the amendment of the regulations?
Thank you very much, John. Let me start off by saying that the intention of amending the regulations was twofold. One, as you know, the President earlier this week had made an announcement that we will extend the period of lockdown from 17 April, which was yesterday, to the 4th of May. And what we needed to do then is to first ensure that that amendment of the extension is reflected in the regulations. The second reason, and I think for us maybe a more important one, is the fact that we wanted to maybe clarify some provisions of the regulations, in some instances modify, amplify, increase the content of the regulations, because you would know the circumstances under which we had passed or promulgated the first set of regulations was quite tight, and they may not have been, we may not have thought through everything. So we wanted to make sure that if there were some things that are vague, and we're not saying the current regulations are perfect, and I'm very happy since we've just started distributing the document that Namibians have taken the time to look through the text and started making comments on it. And I think that's the purpose of this interaction with our Namibian public, is to ensure that, you know, once we've written something, we may not have thought of everything, but that we give them an opportunity to comment, to criticize, to constructively engage with the documentation, so that as time goes and as situations change and as the circumstances change, we allow the space to make the required amendment. So that really was. Okay. I do want to quickly say, John, though, that we must remember that lockdown is just one measure of our overall state of emergency.
Okay. I've got another follow-up question to you, Yvonne, and that would be in in a summarized form without again going into the details, because we will do that later, what would you say are the major changes between Proclamation 9 and 13?
I suppose the biggest change, apart from the fact that we've now extended the time, but we've also extended the additional requirements to the entire nation. What we've also now inserted. Remember, in the first regulations, we had an annexure that had only Thomas and Erongo. Now we have divided the country into 10 zones, and that's another important aspect that has been included in these regulations. Something else, as we were going along, there were some concerns that members of the public raised. What we've also done now is we have, for example, opened up and relaxed some of the stringent conditions under which the Namibians were operating. So, for example, and I think for us an important amendment is the fact that we opened up the space for informal trading and open markets. And I think that's an important change for us. We've also made some changes around critical services. For instance, we've added education as a critical service. It wasn't there previously. And we've opened up the provisions on educational materials, which is important because if you're talking about closing schools and opening up the space for e-learning, it was important then for us to make provision in the regulations for those kinds of arrangements, because then it gives latitude to the state under the governance of the Minister of Education, but also governing bodies of various schools, including private schools, I suppose, to make the arrangements that they need to make for us to continue the teaching and learning process in Namibia.
Okay, thank you very much, Eva. For the Attorney General, last night when I went through the regulations, the amended regulations, I must say that I like the tone of the regulations. What do I mean by that? The regulations written in plain language. It is it is very much collaborative language that is used as opposed to coercive language. Can you explain to us and to the nation, it's like, what was the rationale for drafting the specific regulations in such kind of language?
Thank you, John, and thanks to the listeners. John, as you are well aware that the whole process of lawmaking is quite a complex one, it's very technical. However, the main intention to make a law that is probably more understandable and user-friendly is to strive to use a language that can be understood by the ordinary person. And sometimes, I think as lawyers, we get caught up into the technical language and the legalistic part of the law. But since this part of legislation is meant to be used by the whole nation and by ordinary people, we have attempted to use a language that could be understood, that could not cause a lot of confusion, as we have seen that in the past, there is always an issue in terms of interpretation as to what certain provisions of the law means, and it is what is intended to achieve. So in this case, even though I must admit that it's not a perfect piece of legislation or amendment, however, we have attempted to address some of the defects or deficiencies that exist in the previous one or in the earlier proclamation. This is really the main aim to help the users of this law and the members of the public to understand it better. But however, I need also to consider that it may not necessarily have addressed all the concerns that might have been raised. I know that there are a lot of areas that still require some perfection, and we shall continue to work on some of those areas, even by either amending where it's necessary or by explaining, via explanation and education, because we believe that for Namibians to be able to really comply with this piece of legislation, they first and foremost need to understand what it meant, and also to appreciate the rationale behind some of this provision, and also to appreciate the main objective why we are having the state of emergency in place, and why certain measures and restrictions have been put in place. So that's really the main aim, and I just want to continue, insist that since this is a very technical piece of legislation, in a sense that it is addressing some of the issues that we have never experienced before. Somehow, somewhere, we still need to educate our people, we still need to explain certain provisions, and I want to urge the nation to also indicate to us what else that we need to do to be able to make them understand so that they feel that they are able to comply without too many doubts as to what some certain provisions are meant.
Thank you, Festus. And so for that reason, I'm going to ask you this follow-up question. Are there plans to translate the regulations into local languages? We have just heard from the lady that was speaking from the hotline that there are also people that are trying to educate and to explain some of these things in the local vernaculars. What can we say this, or can we expect the same in this regard?
John, ideally, I think we want to have this legislation probably translated in 2 different languages. But because of the agency and because of the time constraint that we have, what we have discussed, I think at the cabinet level, we have looked at various ways in which we can at least educate our people, also to explain the law to the nation. There are various aspects that we are looking at. I think even after this interview, I shall be going to NBC Oshiwambo Radio to go and explain the law in Oshiwambo. And there is also undertaking from various institutions like our colleagues from MICT to see how best we can take that to other language stations so that we can explain this law to the nation. So we believe that in doing so, we shall be able to then achieve the main objective of this law.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we're going to deal with some specific things that I've picked up. And please, if some of the things that I'm asking you about is not on your, or is some of the things that I'm having might be also on your list, or some I might have left out, please feel free to also elaborate on this. But in order to have a structured discussion, I would want the Minister to explain to us the meaning between essential services and critical services that has been brought in this new regulations.
Thank you very much, John. I think an important question. So remember, when you talk about essential services or critical services, the elements that you want to cover is, does the disruption or interruption of that service, does it affect the health, the safety of a particular nation? And remember, we have a state of emergency because we couldn't use our current setup of laws and institutions to respond to COVID-19. So I think people must always keep that at the back of their mind to say, why do we find ourselves in this situation? We're finding ourselves in this situation because, like I always say, a state of emergency provides you with some flexibility to do the things that you need to do, and it also allows you to suspend some common law provisions or statutes, but it also allows you to bring to life perhaps some procedures and rules that will help you facilitate the management, in this instance, a health crisis. So when we talk about, so the Labour Act 11 of 2007 actually has a very structured list of essential services. It has also defined essential services, and that's where I borrow the elements from. And so what we needed to do is, we knew, at least as cabinet, that that list would not have covered everyone. That would otherwise, under these circumstances, needed to respond to how to manage and facilitate the dangers of COVID-19. And so what we did is we took that list that is provided for by the Labour Act, which really the objective is to address concerns that relates to labour matters, and it's in a way it's restrictive, and we took what we thought was a broader umbrella, which is critical services, to include others that would otherwise not fit in that, and that's why we have a list. So there's no, maybe the difference is nuanced, but technically it's really about wanting to amplify or augment or increase what was already provided for, so that we were able to place a larger group of persons that would otherwise not have fit. For example, cabinet members, members of parliament would not otherwise have fitted neatly into that list.
And what about the informal traders? Do they provide essential services, or is it a critical service?
So what we've done is we've listed what are essential goods, which includes foodstuffs and so forth. You would have seen that in our annexure. And so informal traders that fit, that provide that service, supplies critical services or essential goods that relate to COVID-19, health and so forth, they would otherwise then be considered as critical service providers.
And as such be allowed to continue?
Yes, I mean the idea is that we open up that space and, you know, so that you are able to now buy your tomatoes at the guy that sits at the corner in the location. For example, whether you live in Mabashu or you live in whatever area you're living in, you don't have to now walk all the way to ShopRite or to Vuurmanbroek to purchase your onions and your tomatoes. So in that sense, that gentleman at the corner of that street then becomes a critical service provider.
Very good.
And he provides essential goods.
Thank you very much. You want to add?
Yes, just to add something to what the Honourable Minister just mentioned. In terms of the opening up, we have looked at various economic activities that could be opened up without necessarily risking the lives of Namibians. And the open market and the informal trading was one of those aspects. And notwithstanding that decision, there has been always an issue about how can we then manage that situation without necessarily exposing members of the public to the risk of being infected. So then the discussion took place between the relevant ministries and the Ministry of Health, so to say that we shall go ahead, open up these areas. However, we shall put certain health protocols in place to ensure that when that sector is opened up, people are managed in terms of the regulations, how to go there, how to conduct the activities there, those who shall be allowed to trade, and the customers in terms of social distancing, in terms of sanitation, and in terms of also other health measures that shall be required to mitigate the impact or the contamination or the transmission of COVID. So therefore, those other arrangements shall be subject to those health protocols just to ensure that we mitigate against the transmission. Okay. And also to make sure that health standards and measures are in place at those places.
Okay. John, just to say that it's not new. These are the same protocols that have been imposed on those that are in a formal market. Okay. So this is not an additional burden that is placed only on informal traders or in open markets. We do require it even for Vuurmanbroek or Checkers or ShopRite or whoever it is that is trading at the moment.
Thank you very much. Let's talk about the definition of liquor. It caught my attention that, I don't want to give the answer, but would you mind to talk about the definition of liquor in terms of, and also the prohibition in terms of selling and purchasing?
Okay, very well. So John, I'm going to speak to the broad tenets of it, and I'll allow the Attorney General to go into some technical detail if he needs to. But let me just start off by saying, just because there is a state of emergency doesn't mean that existing legislation, like the Liquor Act 6 of 1998, are no longer in operation. All statutes continue to operate unless the President, by proclamation or by regulation, specifically suspends it. So I think I want the Namibian public to understand that it doesn't stop operating. So what we have done, because in the first set of regulations, we had alcohol, for example, and it wasn't too clearly defined. And so what we found is that law enforcement was struggling to in some instances, have an offense because it was unclear whether or not a particular drink falls within the ambit of what is alcohol or what is liquor. And so when we were amending, we thought, okay, the best way that we can deal with it is to go back to existing legislation, which is your Liquor Act 6 of 1998. And it actually defines what is liquor. It has a broad category that you would have seen in the regulations. But also, something that also caught my attention earlier before I came here was the issue around tombo. And tombo is actually also defined in the Liquor Act. So what we've done is we've lifted the provisions of the Liquor Act and placed it in the regulation. So if there is any challenge or difficulty in accepting the text that is provided in the regulations, then I think people have a right to challenge that provision of the Liquor Act. Because that's what we've done is to simply follow what is already in existence, so that we could clarify, because people are saying this is not and that is, and so forth. And I know that members of the public may have some concerns about the manner in which we've lifted it, but it's not something new, it exists. And if members of the public, and I know that, for example, there's been some concerns about the provisions of the Liquor Act, but for the moment, that is what we are working with.
Mr. Attorney General, it's like when it comes to the selling or purchasing of liquor, however defined, there's a penalty to be imposed. But I was just wondering, it's like the 2,000 across the board, whether you are buying or whether you are selling. Is there not an inconsistency? It's like, what disincentive is there? For example, the person that is selling alcohol not to sell if only the penalty to be imposed is only at 2,000. Would you mind talking about that?
Well, the intention of these regulations are not really to punish people. That's not the intention. The intention is really to control certain activities during the state of emergency, and particularly during the period that is stipulated, in this case, during the lockdown period, as to which activities people can engage in and which activities cannot engage in. So, therefore, the issue about the 2,000, that's actually that's the maximum amount that should be imposed. But should you then be found guilty, it can be up by that 2,000 plus, 6 months imprisonment. But the main reason really is to require people to comply without necessarily being forced. It should not be viewed as a law enforcement issue. It should be looked at from the health point of view and from the, saving lives point of view, to sort of say that Namibians, we are faced with a serious pandemic. It's a challenge to the whole country, not only Namibia, but to the whole world, as we have seen that people are dying all over the world, Spain, US, England, China. So therefore, before we are faced with such a critical situation, we have to put certain measures in place, and we have identified certain areas that need to be controlled. Sale of liquor is being one of them, because there has been explanation why that need to be controlled for obvious reasons. So therefore, the amounts that is stipulated there, it should not really be good to say that, look, you should just pay and then continue. Obviously, if there is, a tendency of some people are displaying a propensity of engaging in these activities, regularly, then we have to look at the reason why would somebody do that. I think any, Namibians who is, patriotic would definitely look at it as this should not be viewed as a law enforcement issue, but it should be looked at from the health point of view, also from the point of view of saving lives. So therefore, we believe that there was a balance between, getting people to comply, and also to ensure that where there is a need to control it, at least there is some element of deterrence in the law.
Okay.
John,
very quickly, because we've got quite a lot.
Just to say, John, that we must remember that when the issue of liquor, the prohibition of liquor came about, a lot of people were really, I think, to use the colloquial, taking chances. And I think there's confusion about what powers do the police have We must remember that the police continue to operate under the Police Act of 1990, and in section 13 and 14 of that statute, there are very broad powers that the police have in terms of if they see that somebody is either suspected of about to commit offense, in this instance, either buying or selling liquor or alcohol, or if they find you in possession. I find this quite interesting. I discovered that in section 40 of the Criminal Procedure Act, it actually says, without a warrant, a peace officer, which is a police officer, is entitled to if you're found to find you to be in violation or to about to commit an offense. So I think we just need to understand what is the amount of, what is the extent of powers police have when they find you in possession of alcohol. Would you be found to be suspected of having committed an offense, that offense being either having sold or bought alcohol?
Okay. The next regulation that caught my eyes is like the one, regulation number 15, which deals with the closure of schools and higher education institutions. What I've noticed is that the period for opening of schools, for example, has been removed. Would it be right to say that schools and higher education institutions has now been indefinitely closed? Can that be the reading?
I think we have removed the time period because we don't know, what the decisions would be as we going along. But I think the removal of the time period is informed by the fact that we don't know what the health situation would be, and we all know that COVID-19 is spread through congregation of groups, and schools, as we know, is probably the most vulnerable space that our children can find itself. So we want to avoid that situation. But teaching and learning, as you can also see in the regulations, is not stopping. In fact, it's starting. I know that some private schools actually already started, and the state schools are also they're making arrangements. There will be directives to that effect, making arrangements to start the process of e-learning and also distance learning, so that we can cater for, because I know the biggest criticism at the moment is that not everyone has access to e-learning facilities. How does the government catch that group? Which would in many instances be vulnerable to address their concerns. And I think that those are the details that they're working on. The idea and the intention really is to make sure that no Namibian child is entitled to basic education is excluded from that learning process.
Thank you very much. Mr. Attorney General, this region, it's a group of people in Katatura that were jogging, and they were in a big group of people, and they had to be stopped and whatever. What does the regulation say about people that are exercising and all those things? And if people that are coincidentally meeting, do that also constitute a gathering of 10?
John, I think the regulations are fairly clear, and I think they are flexible in that regard. It recognizes that certain activities, shall continue. Attendance of certain, activities. People might find themselves in situations where probably at the pharmacies, at banks, or certain shops. But those arrangements, those congregations are also regulated in terms of health. So to say that there must be some measures to determine social distancing, must be a meter apart between two people, and therefore there must all be, certain elements of sanitations there. However, when it comes to the issues of, moving people to go outside, for example, to go to the shops or to go to the pharmacy or to go and exercise, there are limitations there that are put in the regulations for good reasons. And it is our feeling that the number that is stipulated are quite reasonable. However, what we are realizing is that maybe with time people start to realize the magnitude and the importance of some of these requirements, because this is really, as I said, it's not an enforcement issue. It should be about our own health and precautions that we need to put in place. So we believe that the numbers that are put in place are reasonable. For exercising, for example, 3 people, that's the maximum. But we are seeing that quite a big number of people are going out in mass. And that's not good, and that's not lawful.
Okay.
So we want to encourage Namibians to really look at this issue from a different perspective, say, look, it's my own health if I'm exposed and I get infected. There is also a big chance that I'll also transmit that to my own family members or to the people that I come contact.
Thank you very much.
John, just to say,
Yeah.
we do encourage Namibians to, when they exercise with other family members. There is a reason why we have restrictions and confinement to residences, because we want people to generally be around their own family members. So, and also I encourage Namibians to do any exercise within their neighborhoods so that we avoid people congregating and so on. The kinds of videos we've seen, I think it is a little bit disheartening, because it does create the impression that we are not serious as a nation in some instances about the containment of the further spread of COVID-19.
Just on that one, I think we also need to look at our own behavior, because I think we need to accept that this is an extraordinary situation that we are in. There are various spots or routes in our neighborhood or in Windhoek that are quite popular, where people go there in big numbers to either jog or to hike. So we want to tell people that, look, since there is this situation that we are faced with, we should also try to minimize our activities going through those busy routes or busy spots, so that we don't end up actually congregating in big numbers. So then that will also make the work of the law enforcement officers very difficult to control these movements. So we should, by all means, as Namibians, try to see what is that we can do within limits to keep doing what we are allowed to do within the law, at the same time also to make it easier for the law enforcement officer to do their job.
Yes. Which actually brings me to the next question. Last night on national radio, on national television, 8 o'clock news, Commissioner Chikongo actually lamented the fact that, according to him, they can't do anything about people that are freely moving around and whatever, because in his view, there's nothing there's no regulation that tells them what to do in such instances. Is that understanding right?
I think I would see it as maybe just anxiety and frustration about individual members of our society not taking responsibility for their own health. I think there is enough provisions within the scope of the regulations, but also within the scope of the Police Act and the Criminal Procedure Act to provide the police within reason, of course, where it's necessary and reasonable, that they can take certain steps. For example, to if you want, have people comply with the regulations. Let me just say this, John. What we have in the regulations is, and this is really a footnote to what the Attorney General was saying, is that the idea was really just to encourage people to comply. But where people blatantly disregard instructions from the Namibian police or from a lawful authorized officer, they are in contravention of the regulations. Now, typically, what the police should do, even when they find a public gathering or when they see a group of people exercising, the first thing that they're entitled to do by the regulations is to ask people to disperse, or to even tell people to return to their homes if they are of the view, from what they're seeing, that the situation is no longer in compliance with social distancing, in compliance with hygiene, and all the other requirements that we have, they can ask people to go back. If people refuse to heed that instruction, they are entitled to, under the Criminal Procedure Act, under the powers that are provided for under Section 14 of the Police Act, they can then tell someone that you have now committed or you are about to commit an offense, giving them another opportunity, I suppose, to say, okay, no, I'm going to turn back or I'm going to stop what I'm doing. They can then be, basically charged and fined. Now, the fine of 2,000 is linked to the fact that under the Criminal Procedure Act, police officers actually are authorized to give fines up to 6,000 Namibian dollars, usually. So they can give a person, they can arrest them if they refuse, and give them an opportunity to go to the police station to get an admission of guilt, or they can give them a written notice to appear. So if you are given an opportunity to make the payment, and if you don't make the payment, you'd get an opportunity normally to go and appear in court. So police have the latitude to actually give people fines, and the payment will not happen right there, but you'd then be taken to the police station and arrangements would be made for payment. So, and I think people just need to find ways of complying with the regulations.
Mr. Attorney General, with regard to the operation and closure of certain businesses, as captured under Regulation number 12, I found this kind of worrying. It says that all businesses are supposed to, of course, produce proof of registration. And with regard to the meme that is selling fat cakes, because she's also an informal trader, does it mean that meme that is selling fat cakes or whatever it is must also produce some kind of proof of registration in terms of these regulations?
Well, I think we need to draw a difference between the businesses that are properly registered under BIPA, as they say, and the open markets and informal traders. Of course, there are certain requirements in terms of the local authorities or in terms of the bylaws that will require people who intend to do certain things within the jurisdictions of those local authorities to either be registered with the local authorities or with other, probably the Ministry of Trade, for example. So in terms of the approach to the issue of open markets and informal traders, I think there is a separate regime that regulates that. Okay. And those requirements are basically set out by the Ministry of Urban in collaboration with the local authorities. So therefore, the requirements are not as strict as those that applies to the formal business. Okay. And the main intention is really to make sure that the people are able to make a living and also to provide the services. And that is confined to essential services only. And in this case, it's regulated in such a manner that it doesn't frustrate also the intention of the regulation.
Thank you very much, Attorney General. I want us to elaborate on offenses and penalties as captured under Regulation number 15. What caught my eye is the criminalization of the spread of fake news and misinformation. So my question is, how is this going to be policed, so to speak?
John,
is this not a case of impossibility?
I'm not sure about impossibility, because your normal rules pertaining to whether it's civil or criminal proceedings and evidence continue to operate. That's the first point. But the second point is, you must remember, John, you have your general elements of any offense, including whatever you do. So you must remember, whatever you do, is it permitted by law? You know, if it's not permitted by law, it's unlawful. Do you have the intention to cause harm? So your causation and your harm element is then included in there. And so you need to ask yourself, is what you're about to do, whether it is that you are distributing something that you've just received from someone, is it about to cause some kind of harm, and is it allowed by law? We have criminalized it because I think we understood that there is a growing concern, I think globally as well, about the increase in fake news. So, you know, it doesn't capture all of it, but what we are saying is, we know the normal rules of evidence would apply if we have to determine whether or not somebody should be held liable for the distribution of fake news.
Right. I've also, still on the issue of the offenses and penalties, it's like there's this growing concern that some of the police officers, of course, during this time they are vested with great discretionary powers. And for me, I've noticed that omission, that there's no penalization for any police officer in terms of the regulations. And I know there are normal laws that would apply and whatever, but why does the regulation not specifically address and try to deter police officers from abusing possibly their powers?
John, as it has been pointed out earlier that the existing laws that regulate certain conducts, either of the law enforcement officer or the members of the public, still remain in place. Obviously, we have picked up certain cases or incidents where members of the public have been subjected to some abuse or maybe violation of their rights, and that is a straightforward criminal matter. The members of the public should not hesitate in any manner to report those cases to the police so that those members are dealt with. In fact, as I'm talking to you, we have had situations where some of these cases have been picked up and certain actions have been taken, and we have engaged our colleagues from the defense and from the police to really make sure that this kind of conduct are not tolerated, because the fact of the matter is that the whole intention of this whole process is to protect Namibians. So therefore, if we use heavy-handed in terms of enforcement of the law, to the extent where we basically violate the rights of the citizens, that's not the intention. So therefore, if there is in any way the citizens whose rights are being violated, they are entitled to proceed and lay criminal charges, against those police officers. And then we are encouraging people to do so where it is there are valid complaints. We don't want cases where people simply, because they don't want to comply, and then they complain. That's also not good.
Okay.
John, just to say, precisely because the ordinary laws that are provided for under the Police Act of 1990 are sufficient, we needed not to repeat that in the regulations. There are at least 5 provisions in that act that just focuses on disciplining the police. I must also tell you and reaffirm that both the head of state and the Inspector General and members of the security cluster have been consistent, at least publicly, to indicate that whatever they're doing, they want to do it within the paradigm of human rights. But one cannot always hold the entire cluster responsible for the actions of individual members. We have the Inspector General and the Chief of Defense on record as having indicated people who have acted in gross violation of human rights and total flagrant disregard of the dignity of our people have been disciplined. So I have no doubt that in terms of the institutions that exist, the processes that we have, and the laws that we have at the moment are sufficient to address concerns of misconduct of our members of the police force, police and defense forces.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. In fact, you remind me of what the President last week said in terms of this announcement, is like reminding the police officers that the people are not your enemy. Yes. Like, you are doing this for the people, and so that should be the bottom line.
And the people should also see the police as not as their enemy,
Exactly.
but that we are all doing something that we are all not familiar with how to address. I mean, there are some learnings as we go along.
John, just to add, this is a very, very important aspect in terms of the implementation of these regulations, that for us to be able to succeed in this process, we need the cooperation between the law enforcement officers and members of the public. So therefore, the public must do its part, and the law enforcement officer should also make sure that they act within the law. So that is the only way. Otherwise, if you have one side pulling another direction, then we shall not be able to succeed in doing so. Therefore, we want to urge members of the public to try by all means to comply with the law, and also to assist the law enforcement agencies to be able to carry out their functions properly. And we want also to urge also our colleagues from the law enforcement agencies to make sure that where there is doubt, they should always seek clarification so that we don't find ourselves on the wrong side of the law.
Very good.
Madam Minister, speak to us about this notion of zones, and how does that overlap with regions? Why was there a need to rather talk about zones and not of regions in this particular instance?
John, let me start now. I would want the Attorney General to amplify when I'm done. Is the idea really was to make essential services accessible to the people. That's the first point. And what we realized is, so the zones are not taking away from the regions. Zones really is just a practical arrangement that has been made by the security cluster for purposes of managing the movement of persons and goods. Because remember, it's not only people that move, but of course, goods can't move without people. So what they then proposed, and this is really a proposition from the security cluster, was to say, I put all the regions in zones. What that does is it allows, unlike Thomas and Erongo, for instance, not all the regions are self-sufficient. So the idea and the intention really was to make sure that those areas in the zones, villages, towns, and so forth, that may not have access to, for example, a shopping complex or have access to medical and other supplies, would be allowed by a zonal arrangement to have access to those supplies without the inhibitions that comes with if you want to move from one region to the other one, you would not be allowed to. But what the security class has also done is, apart from putting us into 10 zones, is they've also have what they call 69 lockdown spaces. So there is not going to be a free flow of movement within the zone itself. And again, what is it that we want to achieve? We want to firstly contain the virus, and how do we do it? We do that by reducing the number of people that move around, but also a number of people that congregate at any given time. We've had some challenges in this area. We've seen queues where people don't have social distancing and so forth, and I think that's an aspect that we're working on. So John, the long and short of it is, that was the idea, is to cluster groups and allow for some liberal movement for purposes of people accessing essential services.
Okay. Anything to add?
Yes, John, I think what we need to understand is that now that the lockdown is countrywide, we need to understand that the movement of people between the zones is restricted, subject to, of course, to the exemptions that are provided for in the regulations. So therefore, people who wish to move from one zone to the other, they're required to have a permit if they are not providing certain services, for example. So, but this is not meant to frustrate people who have valid reasons to travel, but it's really just to control the movement of people. But we have also noted that in the process, when this latitude was created, people have actually gone overboard, in the sense that people basically go there to the police or to designated officers who are designated to issue these permits to travel for reasons that are not necessarily valid. As a result, we have big traffic of people who were either moving out of commerce or coming to commerce, and that has really caused a worry in terms of, the authorities, how to manage and control that situation. So therefore, we want to encourage citizens to understand that this has been put in place to really address a critical situation. However, those who have to travel because of valid reasons, they must do so subject to those provisions. But we don't want a situation where people who just want to travel as if, things are normal. And we want also to encourage, those who are in charge in terms of issuing these permits to do so in a responsible manner, so as to not defeat the purpose of this whole, exercise.
We've almost come to the end of the set of questions that I'm having, but I know we spoke earlier about critical services, Yvonne, but I've seen farming. Would you mind to elaborate on farming, the fishing industry, and mining being critical services?
Again, COVID has in a way plunged us into a situation where at very short notice, we had to almost bring all activities, both social, economic, and otherwise, to a halt. And the idea is that we must still, we're still a country, we still have needs as a nation, and we need to continue to survive economically and otherwise. So the idea, you'd have seen in the first round of the lockdown period, there was an almost complete halt to all economic activity. And we can't have that. I think I'm not an economist, but I think economists are basically saying to us, we can't have that situation because we don't know when we will get out of the hoods on this one. So there were certain sectors of the economy that were identified as kickstarting the process of bringing life back, particularly in our economy. You can understand why agriculture, fishing, and so forth are at the forefront of wanting to make sure that when come the 4th of May or come the 5th of May, there's some activities that are already injecting capital into the life of the Namibian economy. So that was the idea behind it. And this actually, these discussions are coming from members of society saying we cannot just go to sleep as a nation. We need to start doing some small things without compromising on the health protocols that we've put in place. So all the requirements that we have for everyone in respect of those that are critical services are required to make sure that we have social distancing, we have hygiene, and all and that there are some exceptions to public gatherings. For example, members of cabinet, for obvious reasons, cannot just be 10 people, but we need to make sure that the environment in which we meet and how we meet and so forth are in compliance with the health protocols.
Fester?
John, just to highlight the fact that, of course, we know that with the declaration of a state of emergency and also the implementation of these restrictions, of course, Namibia, probably the people of Namibia are going through a very, very difficult time in terms of movements, in terms of access to certain facilities. And this is part of the reason, I think, where certain activities has been opened up, and that process continues. The authorities shall continue to review certain areas to look at which other activities that can be looked into with the whole purpose of, to gradually, phase them in, so that at least we can mitigate the impact of this situation on the economy. Because we believe that at the same time, when we are trying to save lives, we must also look at the state of the economy and say how best can we find a fine balance between the two, so as to ensure that the economy is not completely, put under pressure to the extent that we are not able to carry out, our activities that we need to do. At the same time, also to see how best we can, put measures in place to mitigate the transmission. So therefore, there is a process that is going on to make assessment to see which areas, economic activities that we can look into and see how best we can open up those areas without necessarily compromising the health of the Namibian people. And we believe that with time, we shall be able to, come to a situation where we say maybe some of these restrictions shall fall away. But that shall then be informed on by a very thorough assessment of the situation from the economic and health point of view. So therefore, the process continues. It could be that even before, by the end of this period that is set, by the 4th of May, there could be some other changes that could come into force, either to reduce certain measures, by looking at the impact on the economy, and also by looking at what measures that need to be in place in terms of the health protocol.
Thank you very much. These were the questions that I had in terms of my preparations. Maybe if you feel that I've left out some of the issues that needs to be brought to the attention of the nation, please feel free to use this opportunity to clarify before we go and open the lines for the general public to post whatever questions they might have. Minister?
I think, John, this is perfect opportunity for us to engage with the public. So we're happy to take the questions and respond to any specific concerns that members of the public may have. So that provides them with more opportunity to ask the questions. We're happy to answer.
I think that will be the best way, because I think we would probably want to hear from the public as to what are the key issues that need to be addressed from our point of view. and we are more than ready to provide the answers to those questions.
I just want to use the opportunity to say that we are going to open the floor now to the general public for questions. But if someone could kindly assist us in giving us the number that members of the general public can call to, so as to ask the question. And whilst we are waiting for that number, I will then start with the journalists in the house to pose their questions. And again, the questions can be to both the first set that was done in terms of the health update, if there were outstanding questions. I've noticed one of the journalists that wanted to ask a question, or it can also relate to part 2 of the panel discussion, which relates very specifically to the regulations. Mr. Deng.
Well, thank you very much, John, and thank you very much to the panel. Good morning as well. I've just got 3 questions. It's around first of all, public gatherings, and we see that Parliament is mentioned there. If, for one other reason, during the lockdown, Parliament has to reconvene, how will it constitute? Because actually 2/3 can also set and Parliament business can continue in that. But just to elaborate and explain how Parliament would operate under those circumstances. The other one is around fake news, and it's quite a new crime, so to speak, if we say it like that. But also it has the burden of intention. How would we prove that somebody, maybe out of panic, has now spread fake news and so on? And perhaps the other one, there are certain websites, certain institutions that deals with verification of fake news. For instance, Namibia Fact Check. There's also Africa Fact Check. And perhaps that calls for education around media literacy and education of the public to go to those websites before actually spreading such fake news. My last question is around the lockdown. Are we likely to see, or are we thinking around phasing out the lockdown gradually instead of just simply opening the country again? Yes, thank you very much. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay. I'll take one. The lady was first. There was a lady at the back. I'll give her first because she was earlier. Please introduce yourself and the media house, ma'am.
Hello, I'm a member of the public.
Okay.
I'm also trying to medicine a little bit. I want to thank our government and all the action group, and especially John, for the concern for our people.
Thank you.
And I want to honor our fathers of the nation, especially Tate Sam Nujoma, Tate Hifikupunye Pohamba, and our father of the nation, President Hage Geingob. You don't know that you have a secret admirer club. It will probably make you very proud, but I must say it pertains more to your very honored mothers and fathers. Because these Tate and Memenkulu, they reached 108 years. Tate Sam's mother reached 108 years. Tate Pohamba's mother reached 98 years. And since 15 years, I've been collecting some data and meeting many friends, and I want to greet all my friends to honor our seniors, our beautiful seniors, Tate Nkulu Mekulu of the nation, many of whom reached over 100 years. And I want to testify that we have in Namibia not only one of the healthiest climates, but we also have one of the strongest and most resilient people of the world. And it's due to the very, very healthy traditional foods. Mahango has been shown to be one of the healthiest staple foods of the world. Ombua is teeming with minerals and vitamins. Oshikundu, fresh oshikundu made in the evening and drink in the morning, is teeming with natural healthy microbiology. microbes. So I want to testify that I want to just encourage our old people, stay with your traditional foods, you get vitamins, minerals, and you will stay very healthy.
Thank you very much.
And I have 4 questions.
Oh,
The mortality. I would like to know the normal mortality in Namibia. What is in the last 3 years always, please, our media people get to work. What has been our normal mortality, daily, weekly, monthly, seasonal fluctuation in the winter season? And what is the annual normal mortality rate of our 2,583 million people? Please get to work for the last years. Secondly, I want to know the disease and case definition.
Can you repeat that question, please? Can you repeat that question? The second one?
The disease and case definition.
Okay.
With my medical training, I have learned that we are actually meeting every day many microbes, many viruses, many bacteria, and in the symbiosis of our body, the microbes that have a healthy life with us are actually more, they are more than our body cells.
Okay.
The healthy microbes are more than our body cells. There are also positive viruses which prevent diseases.
Okay.
So I would like to know, if we say a person is infected, that means that your body has had a meeting with a microbe, which could be a virus or a bacteria. If you have a good immune system, then that's it. You've had a meeting and you get an antigen antibody response.
So the last question, ma'am?
And the question is, why do we call infected people cases or diseased people? Because only once they get symptoms, develop symptoms, then they can be disease cases, then they can be cases. Otherwise, if they have a normal immunity, then they cannot be cases, even if they find the virus in them.
Okay.
Then the other question is, our normal...
That would be the last one, ma'am.
Yes, our normal hospital bed occupation, what has it been in the last 3 years? What is the capacity of every hospital? How are they occupied? How have they been occupied? When are they full of every hospital? I think that's very important numbers we should get.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Right.
And all the best to our strong people in Namibia.
Thank you so much. Do we have someone from the health sector that can answer some of these very specific health-related questions? Please.
I'll attempt to answer some, but some need preparations. I don't have the data for previous years as were requested. I might need to get that and update at some stage later. Specifically, the first question and the last question, I will not be able to provide that data right now. Question number 2, which is asking on the...
So you cannot provide us with the mortality rate?
The normal mortality rate and hospital bed occupancy for the last 3 years. That I need to consult and get back.
Okay, thank you.
But on the... Though it was not a bit clear, because you asked the disease and case definition, because the case definition, specifically for COVID-19, which we have adopted from WHO guideline, we have splitted these definitions in 3 groups. We have the suspect case, we have a probable case, and we have a confirmed case. A suspect case is a patient with acute respiratory illness, like fever, and at least one of the following, like cough, shortness of breath, and a history of travel to all residents within a location reporting community transmission of COVID-19 cases within the period of 14 days prior to the symptoms onset or the beginning of the onset. Or a patient with acute respiratory illness and having been in contact with a confirmed or a probable COVID-19 case in the last 14 days prior to the symptom start. Or a patient with severe acute respiratory illness, meaning that this person is having a fever and at least one of the symptoms like cough, shortness of breath, and this person requires hospitalization, and the clinician could not rule out other conditions. That become a suspect. So once you suspect, is then when you move into testing for you to confirm. Once you test this person you are suspecting, and you get your laboratory confirmation that the result is positive, that's when we say we have a confirmed case. So per definition, a confirmed case is a person with laboratory confirmation of COVID-19 infection, irrespective of clinical signs and symptoms. At times, maybe it's a contact, then for one reason or the other, this person is tested, because some people might carry the virus and their body does not react, so that they show the signs and symptoms. This person might be a contact, get laboratory test. If the laboratory confirm that the virus is there, again this person become a confirmed case, though he might not have presented symptoms. While a probable case, again always the beginning is a suspect. It's a suspected case for whom the testing of COVID-19 is inconclusive. Because in the laboratory, there are different methods of testing. First, you do the screening test and a confirmatory test. If there is a discordancy or the results are not showing the same, one is showing positive, one is showing negative, is when we say this result is inconclusive or indeterminate. Then we classify that as probable and is treated as a confirmed case. Related to this, question number 3 asked now, why are we calling infected people as cases? This is just because of a mere definition which I have given. As we know, when the body, when there is an introduction of a foreign material in the body, as you have rightfully indicated, it could be a bacteria, it could be a virus. The body is having its own defense mechanism, the immune system. If the immune system is strong, then the body starts reacting. That's when the body starts fighting back, and you develop now signs and symptoms. That's an indication that the body is fighting, trying to get rid of that what does not belong there.
Okay.
So that's merely based on that, then we say this is a case. So it could be a person who is sick, fighting that disease, or that might be that body is not fighting. It could be a carrier, but once the confirmation is there, then we refer as such. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For question number 1 that was asked by Mr. Dank, I'm also informed that there's a lot of incoming calls. So I would want the panelists not to take so much time, but just to be very succinct. The question about public gathering as it relates to Parliament.
Let me just say, Article 53 of the Constitution has made provision for quorum. And so there can be a quorum of 49 members of Parliament. Remember, there are 96 voting members non-voting. That's that the requirement for public gatherings of 10 persons, is an accept Parliament, Cabinet, and any other institution that requires more than 10 people to for the prevention, combating of the further spread of COVID-19, they are allowed to meet. But they must make sure that they meet in an environment that complies with the health protocols. What Parliament will probably need is, if they need all 104 members to be in attendance, they may need a bigger space so that there is social distancing and those kinds of things.
Okay, thank you very much. There was this question for both of you. Either one of you can attempt to answer. Also, with regard to proving intention for the spreading of fake news, misinformation or disinformation. Will that not prove difficult?
Well, as it was said earlier by my colleague, that the law of evidence have not changed. So that basically shall be subjected to the same process. If there is good reasons why a certain person should be charged for having violated the provisions of the regulations, so therefore the prosecution should have to go through the same process. So therefore that is a matter that can be proven or disproven in the court of law. So therefore the intention really to put these provisions to the regulations is to simply say that, look, we should not allow a situation where people might be tempted to spread or misinformation or incorrect information in the public under the circumstances.
Okay.
So therefore, that's the reason.
So the burden will still be proving
It's
beyond
still on the
reasonable
state.
doubt.
The burden is still on the state, unless the evidential burdens, passes during trial.
Okay, okay. And then one last question with regard to that was whether we are looking at the facing it out, the lockdown versus an abrupt closure. I mean, abrupt end, sorry.
I think Peter Denk is answering his own question, because I think we don't want to be, the way we've been launched by COVID-19 to come to an abrupt situation where we had to declare a state of emergency and so forth, it's not the kind of way that we want to get out of it. So there's certainly all intention to make
Sorry
sure.
to interrupt.
No worries.
We've got our first question, member from the public that wants to pose a question. You may go ahead, sir. Yes, Emmanuel, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I want to thank the Honorable Minister and the Attorney General that is there. My question is just about the public gatherings, especially funerals. I find out, and I have seen some WhatsApps, that the public gathering is 10 and more, but you will find out that people, especially in rural areas, because of different traditions that they attach their moral to funerals, you'll find more than 100 people at a funeral, and they try to sit from this tree to that tree and say, but we are here, but we are still have social distancing. So I wanted to find out, why is that not maybe relaxed to say, okay, for things like especially funerals, because of our culture, we have to allow, say, 50 people or so, and then have strict information from law enforcement officers to really adhere to that, for the community to adhere to that, because I'm seeing that people saying, no, why 10? For example, an African man will have 15, 20 children, and they all want to go and bury their father, and then that number is already over the number that is required for public gatherings. How are we going to look at that? And then we got also challenges that we have people that are working at homes. For example, spray paintings and these people. They have 3, 4 cars at home that they are working on. If the police find a son and a father just busy spray painting a car, they will come and say, no, you should not do work now, and we have COVID. Please stop your job, or they take the paint and throw it out and so on. So what do we mean by not working, or by working at home, especially for these people like spray paintings or mechanics? That's my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. A quick response, and I think the conversation around funerals is delicate, because it also has to do with religious and cultural practices, but it's also found to have been the place that people congregate the most. and people are much more susceptible to the kind of close contact interaction that you'd want to avoid. So in this instance, it's an ongoing discussion at this point, but I think we will be guided by what the health experts say about us opening up that space. But we have, people also need to be a little bit creative about how they conduct themselves during that period of time. There are other benefits, reduced costs, but also, you can have a breakdown of people coming to pay their respects in groups of 10. So people can be creative about how they deal with it in the meantime. But we will take it as an ongoing discussion for the moment, but I take that point.
There was also this question about informal traders working from home. Are those people, if I got the question correctly, are those people prohibited from working, doing the spray painting right there from home? Can they continue doing that because they are working from home?
Depends on how many there are.
Maybe working from home, we need to understand exactly what the setup is, because sometimes, if it is in the rural area, for example, it could be a different set of rules altogether. But let's assume that it's happening in towns, for example. I think that's when one needs to really understand what is that is required in terms of the health measures that need to be in place wherever you are working from, so that you don't, so that actually you put measures in place in terms of social distancing, in terms of hygienic standards that are required for you to be able to carry out that.
So 10 people can work at home.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got a second caller, Fritz from Rehoboth. Fritz, can you hear us? Fritz, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, you can go ahead, sir.
I have one question. It's concerning the economy. Wouldn't it be better to keep the borders closed, make wearing a face mask compulsory and social distancing compulsory, but open the businesses?
Fritz, we really can't hear you properly. Hello, Fritz?
Yes?
There's an echo. We really can't hear you properly.
Okay.
Would you mind repeating it again?
All right. Wouldn't it be better?
It's really very bad. We can't hear you.
Okay, I try to phone again.
Can you kindly call us back? It's your line.
I will call you again.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye.
There was a question on public gathering. Do we have another caller?
Okay. John.
Public gathering?
Yes, we don't, the public gatherings of 10 and less people is not prohibited. What is prohibited, and it must be connected to essential service. So that's the connection. And you must comply with the health protocols that are in place. That is the requirement. So what you're doing in the privacy of your home, if you are 6 people sitting behind and painting and doing what you are doing, normally it shouldn't be an issue for us because it's not a public space as far as I can see, but I don't know whether there's a
We've got a third caller, Hafeni from Valfes. Hafeni, can you hear me? Hello, Hafeni?
Yes, sir.
Please go ahead.
All right, sir, I'm having one question and maybe one concern to raise. My question is that we group our country into zones, and I want to understand the modality of when one wants to travel from one point to another within the same zone. For example, if you are in zone 1, I want to know if you are within zone 1, you really need to have a permit for you to travel.
The line is again very, very bad.
Oh, okay. Is a bit better?
Can you please call us back, Hafeni? We're really very sorry, but we can't hear you.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Right. Maybe if there are journalists that wants to join the queue, please feel free. Whilst they are coming, I've interrupted the minister, excuse me for that. Mr. Denk's last question was about the abrupt closure. I think you were still busy explaining
Yes.
that. Excuse me.
Yes, thank you, John, for that reminder. So I suppose as the government, the intention is to slowly, and as you know, we already started to say, what is it that we can do to open up the social and economic space in the country, but also, so to answer Denk's question, which he has also answered himself, is we will not just, everything will not get back to normal, as it were. Remember, we continue to be in a state of emergency for at least 6 months. And that those 6 months, I believe, will end sometime in September. So that allows us to continue opening up and also continuing to review to see what are the areas of concern. Particularly, we must not forget why we find ourselves in this situation. And does it dictate for us to open up, and in what fashion?
You want to add?
Anyway, I think the situation is really like this, that anything that is being done now is ongoing. And we always rely on the situation on the ground based on the advice that we get from our colleagues from health to say, having looked at what is happening in terms of the containment of the disease, in terms of the tests that they are doing on the ground, this will then advise as to whether we should relax some restrictions, whether we should introduce more health measures in place that will then help to mitigate the situation. And of course, at the end of the day, that will then inform us whether or not we need to extend the restrictions that are in place now. We need to relax some, we need to reduce some of the measures in order to mitigate the situation. That's really what will inform us. And again, at the same time, as I say, there's also an ongoing assessment looking at the economic impact and see how best can we then also face in some of the activities, within that time, to be able to allow the economy to continue functioning so that it doesn't stifle the growing of the economy at this stage.
We've got another caller before we give over to the journalists. We've got Maria from Ondangwa that wants to pose a question to the panelists. Maria, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Please go ahead.
Good morning to you. I would like to find out and pose a question in regards to the zones, the classification of how the zones are divided.
Can you repeat the question again, sorry?
No, I want to find out how the zones are divided into. Like, since we say we are from zone 1 to zone 10, like, which one is zone 1, which one is zone 2, and which one is zone 3? If you can have the details again, the information of the zones.
So basically the question is, correct me if I'm wrong, you want to find out more about the regions, the zones, excuse me, which regions constitute what zone, basically?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Do you have it here?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
John?
Yes, you may
go. On the regions, I think the Annex A actually set out what zones, what makes us of which zones. If you go to Annex A, for example, it tells you exactly, let me just get the, now if you go to Zone 1, for example, so Zone 1 is Zambezi. Then Zone 2 is Kavango East and Kavango West. And then Zone 3, you have Ohangwena, Oshikoto, and Oshana region. Zone 4, we have Msati region. Zone 5, we have Ochodonjupa and Omaheke. But that will then exclude certain parts of those regions that
is in Zone 6.
Yeah, that form part of Zone 6. That's Rioboth and Okahanja.
Okay.
Then we have Zone 6, that's the Commerce region, that then includes Okahanja and Rioboth for obvious reasons, because those towns fits into in terms of economic activities.
And the two tarred roads between the...
Yes.
That's right. Then you have Zone 7, that's Erongo. And then Zone 8, we have Karas. Then Hardap is Zone 9, and Zone 10 is Kunene region.
But I'm sure, Attorney General, those zones would be published also like announced to the people over the radios, as you've mentioned earlier, so that people know?
That's correct. In fact, those zones are part of the Gazette that
Okay.
is published already.
Yes.
So I think we just urge our members of the public to really try to access that documents. It's freely available.
No, but I mean,
But
we
we-
should use the media so
Yes.
as to inform the people
That's
about
correct.
this.
That's correct. That information shall be shared as we go along.
Yes.
In fact, the security cluster has provided much more detail of the zones.
Okay.
That's broken down. That document could perhaps be shared.
Thank you very much. We are again going to first, before we take any further questions from the general public, we are again going to allow the media practitioners to ask their questions. And I'm informed there are 2 mics that can be used.
Thank you very much. My name is Ogito Gray from Republican. I've got 4 questions. Firstly, regarding the restrictions on alcoholic beverages, is it correct that beverages with alcohol content below 3% can now be sold? And is it only the sale of an alcoholic beverage which is prohibited, or is possession or any other use of it also possibly prohibited? Secondly, I'd like to ask about those self-starters, specifically looking at the informal traders. I know on social media I saw a picture of a gentleman from the coast who got his wheelbarrow out. He put his vegetables neatly in bags. He got his gloves and he has some hand sanitizer, and he set off shortly after the president made his speech to commence his business. But officially we are supposed to await regulations from Ministry of Urban Rural Development, which hasn't said anything yet. So do you encourage people to take the initiative and try to follow the rules and go on with their lives? Or do you think people should wait for the officials to come out with relevant regulations, bearing in mind how urgently people might need to put food on the table? Thirdly, I'd like to know specifically about mines. Is it now a position that the mines can ramp up production and start off digging out the open pits again, or is it still a restricted production? And finally, I'd just like to know whether the decision to criminalize fake news is an indication that government is more comfortable trying to restrict what people say rather than confident in fighting fake news by providing information that is trustworthy and accessible and so timeless that there's no room for fake news, if that is well understood. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The second journalist, before I give over to the panelists.
Thank you so much. I would like to recognize Honorable Minister of Justice, Honorable Attorney General. I'm Pancho Molongeni, representing the Namibian. I want to really ask a question to our Minister of Justice in terms of the enforcement of the provisions, and actually in this state of emergency, are we adopting a human rights approach? And what I mean by that is, if someone, for instance, is an irregular migrant and may have the symptoms, and they go forth to the Ministry of Health, are they now going to also be detained for being an irregular migrant? Similarly, we know that people don't have much income. A lot of people would turn to sex work during this time. Sex work doesn't stop. Will people still be criminalized, especially ladies who often themselves are irregular migrants, if they present to the health facilities with symptoms, since they are very exposed? And similarly, couldn't there be an intervention to them to actually inform them of the dangers? And that's actually a question about what is our approach. Is it really punitive, or is it a human rights approach as we move forward? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we take any other questions, let me first rather attend to, yeah?
John, let me start with the last question, which is a norm adopted, because that's the thing that you remember first. I think the question, there is no doubt about the continued operation of our constitutional framework in Namibia. you would understand that once a state of emergency is declared, the Article 24 has provided us with a scope of rights that can be limited. There are certain rights, and it really relates to what Mr. Mulengeni is talking about, is the fact that when there are certain rights that cannot be derogated from. Your right to dignity, your right to equality, your right to non-discrimination, even your cultural rights. And I think, at all material times, in our interaction with the Namibian public, we try and, deal with our people in that fashion. Now, there are some challenges around what he terms sex workers and migrant workers and so forth. By its very nature, a state of emergency limits the movement of people. It doesn't stop people from doing what they would ordinarily do within the privacy of their space. There's nothing that stops, in this instance, a sex worker from continuing to do his or her work at a space that would otherwise not interfere with public movement and that will not move divided from one place to the other. So that's really the point that I would like to make. So, like the Attorney General was saying earlier on, the intention has never been to be punitive. That's why we encourage Namibians to comply, because I believe that as a collective we are saying we're finding ourselves in this situation. What is it that we should do? What are the things that Mr. Mulengeni thinks we should do differently to enhance and create a space that is more human rights friendly without compromising on what it is that we want to achieve, which is the containment of the virus. So that, I think there's a huge debate that from a human rights perspective that we can continue to have, but the intention is never to prejudice the Namibian society.
A question that relates directly to what was asked by the last speaker was whether the criminalization of fake news doesn't serve as a smokescreen by the government to restrict free speech of the people.
Absolutely not. And remember, there is no right that is absolute. I think that's something that we need to understand, even within our constitutional paradigm. But I think even journalists know there's a reason, for example, why we have a media ombudsman. There's a reason why there is an opportunity created for members of the public to complain if any action is taken that is likely to cause harm or is of a defamatory nature. So the intention is never really, and I don't understand where we get this impression from, that government is always out to get people. That is not our intention. The intention is, how do we ensure that we protect a disproportionate number of Namibians? It's not always going to satisfy everyone, but we want to create an environment where Namibians will also feel safe. This is the kind of information that could cause serious harm, not just to this country, but to individuals of our society. For instance, the reason why we refer to case number as opposed to the name of a person is to protect the dignity of people, is to protect the privacy of our Namibian people. So there are so many instances and examples that we can show that the Namibian government has never been out to get its people.
How would you answer then the question with regard to the restriction of alcohol? Does it mean those with an alcohol volume of less than 3, is it allowed?
It would, it would seem to me from the perspective of the Legal Act that anything below that content, because we, as I said to you, we've taken this from the Legal Act, and I know that it has also created an ideological debate whether or not this is now promoting a certain ideology, capitalism versus socialism and so forth. And those are debates I think Namibians should continue to have, but we need to ask ourselves the fundamental question at the end of the day, what is it that the government is doing to enhance protection of our people and the health of our society? There is a supreme objective that all government should have, and that is to ensure that the welfare and the health and the safety of its society is supreme.
With that answer, are you then saying that the question starting a garden, or what is that? Go to the mic, sorry please.
The example was of an informal trader who trades in vegetables. After he heard the president's speech, he got out his wheelbarrow, packaged his goods, put on gloves and got some hand sanitizer and went on the street. But the president's speech also said regulations would be determined by Ministry of Urban Rural Development, who hasn't said anything since the president's speech. I'm asking, should citizens now wait until the ministries present the regulations, or can they take the initiative provided they act within the spirit?
Festus, would you mind?
Thank you.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, thank you. There are certain activities that definitely have to be regulated before they are undertaken. And I think the best is probably to identify what is that person intend to do. For example, as we have pointed out, regarding open markets and street vendors, for example, there are certain measures that need to be put in place for those activities to take place, just to ensure that at least there are protections or measures are in place to regulate those activities. The situation that you are pointing out, I'm not too familiar whether that's somebody who's already registered with the Ministry of Trade or somebody who's probably a sole trader who's simply doing this on his or her own. So we probably need to understand more. And should there be any questions that need to be clarified, the Ministry of Trade is engaged in identifying some of those entities that are required to register, just to get a confirmation certificate, that these are people who are engaged in the provision of critical services and goods. So if there is any doubt whatsoever, they should then engage the Ministry of Trade just to understand what is it that they need to do. Because I'm not too sure at this stage where they are, whether they are registered already, whether they intend to do so. So therefore, those information can be obtained from there. However, there could be other activities that may not necessarily need to wait for the minister. So we just need to be clear as to what is it that the person intend to do. So, but just to add to that, there is also a process whereby various ministries have or are in the process of coming out with directives that stipulates what exactly need to be done in terms of process that need to be followed. Some of those directives are already coming out, and unfortunately some of them are still on the pipeline. So we just want to urge the public to keep on checking with the relevant ministries. If you are, for example, in the agricultural sector, you check with the Ministry of Agriculture. If you are in the mining, you check with the Ministry of Mines and Energy. If you are in the fishing, the same, so that you get the relevant information.
There was a question with regard to mining, whether does it mean normal mining continue now, or is it still in a restricted format? Would you mind talking about that?
Yes, thank you, John. The issue of mining was discussed extensively. That was discussed same time with the issue of fishing. And mining initially was looked at from the basis that maybe there need to be some minimal mining just to do some maintenance work so that the main does come to a standstill. However, then there was some reconsiderations on the matter. Normal mining is allowed under the current regime. Okay. However, that shall be subject to health protocols that are set and agreed between the Ministry of Mines and the Ministry of Health. That's really just to ensure that whatever activities are taking place at the mines or those operations are subject to those health protocols.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Let's take the next round of questions from the journalists.
Good morning, Thierry Fred and journalists. I only have two questions. One for Mr. Mbandeka. I just wanted to know, there's been videos that have been circulating on social media where the police were they were very disturbing videos where the police were using some sort of brute force.
Can you speak into the mic, please?
There have been videos that have been circulating on social media of late where I think the latest one was one where the police was using brute force to pouring traditional beer on someone who was supposedly selling it. These are some sort of instilled fear in the public. From Mr. Mbandeka, I just wanted to know what exactly is the police supposed to do? Let's say they get to a place where maybe people are breaching the regulations. What is the first thing that they're supposed to do? How do they communicate? And also, what are the guidelines in terms of using the most minimum force as possible? That's question number one. Then to the Minister of Justice, I just wanted to clarify. There's also some sort of confusion. Let's say people are moving from one suburb to the other. For example, I'm moving from Katutura, I'm going to acquire essentials in town. I don't have a letter that then says I'm an essential service worker or whatnot. Sometimes there were roadblocks. I think just recently in Windhoek where they were sent back. Right. What is the situation for those who, because definitely this person is coming from Katutura, they can't find certain essential services maybe in Katutura, and they need to go to town. Are those people catered for as well? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. The next one.
Thank you. My name is Kevin. Once again, I present for Eagle FM. These questions are coming from our listeners. I've got 3 questions for you. Can you please ask the Minister of Health, Gather is not here, but we do have some authorities, to tell us about the 2 Romanians. Have they recovered? And the second one.
Can you repeat that? I didn't hear that properly.
The Romanian couple.
Okay.
Has the couple recovered completely? And the second question, I think this one goes to the Honorable Minister of Justice. Regulations, together with the Attorney General, regulations provide that a gathering of 10 can attend a funeral. Funerals are conducted by pastors, but pastors are not listed as essential service providers. How will that work? Secondly, is it correct to state that weddings are prohibited since no mention of them is made? Can a couple get married at a magistrate's court or by a pastor behind closed doors? And then the last one, also coming from our listeners, who is the inventor of the test technology? Who is the producer? Who is the manufacturer? Is the manufacturer linked to the predicted surveillance outcome and predicted action plan?
Who is the inventor?
Who is the producer?
The producer.
Who is the manufacturer?
The manufacturer.
Of the test technology.
Of the test technology.
Is it linked to the predicted surveillance outcome and predicted action plan? It's a very technical question, all coming from our listeners. Thank you.
Outcomes.
Right. Yes, thank you very much. There was a mix of both questions with reference to the regulations as well as directed to the health sector. So please stand by and then from the health people to answer some of those questions. The question of brute force, the use of brute force by the police, what must the public know and do in such cases, and whether there are guidelines with regard to the use of minimum force?
I will allow the Attorney General to answer that as the advisor to government, but I think I want to answer just to say there is nothing coming from the head of state and the leaders in the security sector that encourages the use of violence and force against any member of our public. I think that must be very clear. And then there is provision made under the Criminal Procedure Act, and I believe also under the relevant statutes, that police must usually only use force that is proportionate. So you can't use force that will be greater than the thing that you want to stop. So I think where there's been a disproportionate engagement with law enforcement, members of the public have access to. There is a disciplinary committee at the police. I think what we will do is probably in due course share the information from the security cluster about who the people can contact and how they can make their complaints if they have been treated unfairly. But what we are asking people to do is when they're instructed by law enforcement to stop an action, whether it's to disperse a public gathering, we ask you to comply because there's a reason, because you are actually contravening the law if you don't comply with a lawful instruction. I also want to just respond to the issue about essential services. I think as a general rule, people, you must have some indication, because now it appears to me that the burden is now on members of the public, because the law enforcement has been so inundated and even in a way, I think, overwhelmed with requests and people moving up and down, is we want people to be confined to their homes, but when you leave, because you need to get essential goods, we are asking you to firstly do that within the confines of your neighborhood. I think most, whether it's in Komastál or in Kadutura, you would normally find. But in the event you are unable to find, my suggestion would be that you take the receipt from, the things that you have, because you must have something that you've bought elsewhere. In Woemanbrock, for example, close to Koreanghap, we ask you to carry some kind of evidence or a list of your, whatever it is that you need to do. You'll have to satisfy the authorized officer that there is need for you to go all the way from Komastál to go and do shopping in Klein Windhoek. You must understand the objective is we want to minimize movement.
Okay. Attorney General, 2 questions before we give over also to the health sector in terms of finalizing. Are pastors included in the number of 10 when it comes to funeral? That's one. And whether weddings are allowed or not allowed during the period of lockdown?
Thank you. I think in terms of numbers, the number, as I said, the number has not changed. So therefore, if it says 10, then at any given time, at that particular occasion, you must conform to that number. I think the arguments about the churches and various other activities, sometimes they are very difficult to probably provide for, because I think there are very emotional issues attached to some of these things. The same thing with cultural events. So therefore, the basic objective really is to minimize the gathering.
So in other words, pastors, as the rule currently stands, they are included in the 10.
So that's what the regulation says. But
quickly about, because they are asking me to wrap up, quickly about weddings.
Weddings, basically we all know that in terms of the courts have also come up with their own procedures, what should happen during this time period. So therefore, that it appears from the look of things that the directive that has been produced is to say that only urgent matters shall then take place in the courts during this.
So wedding is not urgent?
No, John.
Okay.
No, that is not, no.
Yeah. let me just clarify. It could be that in the circumstances, if the arrangements are done in such a way that the ceremony can be done under controlled circumstances, that could be done. But I've seen that in some circumstances, for example, certain churches have completely said, no, they are not going to conduct ceremonies. Okay. But at court, I think there could be different processes whereby that can be arranged, but that's subject to those conditions that are also...
The Minister wants to add
yes,
quickly.
the courts have said for now we will not register marriages. But remember, marriage is not about whether you're doing it at the courts or at the church. It's about the marriage officer. So if the person that wants to marry you is registered as such and is qualified to do that, if you want to do that in your yard, it just makes, and it can still happen. Okay. We can't control what happens behind closed doors, unfortunately.
Very quickly, an update with regard to the Romanian couple. That was one of the questions that was asked from Eagle FM.
Yeah, as we all know, that the Romanian couples were our first cases. And as you have heard the update from the minister earlier, on those who have recovered, these were not included as yet. Okay. They are still in isolation. We are still monitoring them. The nation will...
The manufacturer of this technique, I don't think... Okay, would you mind answering that question, or would that be an unfair question?
Can I get the question again?
The question that was also asked was like, who benefits really from this whole COVID-19 thing? And so the question was, is it the inventor of the technology, the producer, the manufacturing of this testing technology? That's how I got it. Not?
Yeah.
But we are about to wrap up, no?
You could have just left.
Very quickly.
Okay.
Who is the inventor?
Or who is the
the
inventor?
producer, the manufacturer? Are these, or is this entity linked to the predicted surveillance outcome and predicted action plan?
Okay,
That's
ma'am.
the question.
You got the question?
A bit beyond me, probably.
Okay.
I think that questions I need to refer it to our lab experts
Expert.
to be able to provide that answer,
Yeah.
probably in due course. Thank you.
Right. What we will do now, we've come to the end of this broadcast. But in order to be, just to be fair, what we will do, because we had two sets of things that we wanted to address, the health update, and so we will start with them, each one, just very briefly, your last closing remarks, and then we would come then to the legal sector, Minister of Justice and the Attorney General also to very briefly give us their closing remarks, and then we'll close the session. Would you mind? All three of you, very quickly.
Thank you very much for the platform given to the health sector. Just to remind the nation that we are still fighting for COVID-19, against COVID-19. So we need to put all our efforts together. It's a state of emergency where everyone is expected to contribute their bit in this fight. Together we can make it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm informed that unfortunately we can't take all three. Excuse me for that. And for the expectations that I've created. Excuse me for that. Attorney General?
Thank you, John. I think Namibia as a nation, we have embarked upon an exercise which is extraordinary in a sense that we are faced with a very, very serious situation. And that situation has warranted the President to invoke certain provisions of the Constitution, that's to declare a state of emergency to address the situation of COVID-19. For that, certain measures are in place to regulate our conduct during that period. And this is not necessarily to make the situation more harder for people than it is, but it's simply to protect their lives and to make sure that Namibia suppress the transmission of COVID. And we therefore, from the legal and justice sector, we want to encourage Namibians to really take this as a life-saving measure, not as a law enforcement issue, so that we can protect our lives, protect our families' lives, and also to make sure that Namibia go through this period and make sure that we don't end up faced with a very, very critical situation where we're not able to control. So we therefore want to encourage all Namibians to comply with their regulations and to make sure that they minimize their movements either within their surroundings or in or out of their zones. And we know that this obviously imposes some limitations in some of their freedoms, but we believe that this is done with a very good intention, and we think that the conditions that are in place are fairly flexible and reasonable so that to allow them to be able to have access to the basic services and goods until such time when these restrictions are relaxed. So therefore, we want to encourage also Namibians and members of the public to cooperate with the law enforcement agencies through this period. And should there be any situation that warrants, attention of the authority in terms of probably the abuse of or a violation of their human rights, we want to encourage those people to come forth with the information so that we can make sure that such kind of practice is stopped or minimized. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister.
John?
Madam Minister, excuse me.
No worries. John, I just want to say we must remember whatever gathering is going to be allowed, whether it's 10 people or more, it must be for the sole objective of containing the further spread of the virus, to control and manage COVID-19. You cannot, during this period, have a party, for example. We will not have a situation where people use this opportunity or what they think are spaces in the regulations to not comply with what we want to achieve. So please stay at home. When you are in the public space for those limited times, please practice social distancing and avoid crowded places. It's extremely, extremely important. People must not use the benefit of the privacy of their homes to gather as friends. Homes are meant for family members and those people who live in the same area, either for rental arrangements and so forth. So Namibia, please be safe and take care of yourself.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank at this opportunity all the panelists that has contributed very effectively and in a very qualitative manner to educate the nation in this regard, with regard to what we've discussed. So thank you so much, Yvonne. Thank you, Festus, Lily Keller, and all the others that I cannot mention by name because we are running out of time. I would like also to say I thank the ministry, Edie, for having invited me to participate and to moderate this discussion. I see this as my singular honor, and I can but just also repeat what the minister is saying here. It's like, please, ladies and gentlemen, everyone, let us stay safe, wash our hands, and practice social distancing. Thank you very much, and as they say in Oshihero, okuhepa. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ooh.